Good afternoon. Welcome to Selling in Brooklyn, a workshop for sellers. I'm Tina Fallon, an agent at Realty Collective. We're a boutique real estate agency here in Brooklyn, founded 18 years ago to defy the stereotypes associated with real estate in New York. We're here as your coach, as your therapist, your sounding board. We're here to try to make this process, which is incredibly stressful, as easy as possible for you. I'm also here with Rashidah Siddiqui. Rashidah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rashidah Siddiqui. I'm a real estate attorney. My office is located downtown Brooklyn, but I practice in both New York and I would say northern New Jersey. I represent clients that are selling in all of the boroughs, also included Nassau, Suffolk County. And it's been practicing roughly 20 plus years now. It's a boutique small real estate law firm in New York. And look forward to giving you advice on things that you should, as a seller, think about as you prepare and put your property on the market.
We are going to be putting information into the chat. You can also ask questions in the chat as we go along. We're going to put in now a helpful guide, which is a timeline to help you follow along. So moving on, let's ask, why sell now? It's so interesting that you're in this because it is not an ideal seller's market at the moment, but sometimes you just have to sell. So you're trading up, you need more space. Your property is in a high demand category. You have outdoor space. You have a townhouse in Brooklyn, something that's a hot commodity at the moment, or you're simply ready to leave New York City. You've owned your home long enough and now you're ready to move on. Those are all really good reasons to sell right now. And even in a market that doesn't seem great for sellers, there's always buyers out there, and our job is to help you connect to them. So when you're thinking about selling, one of the considerations, obviously, that you're considering is what's happening in the market. And the market has been in a constant state of flux over the past few years. So obviously, interest rates have lessened demand, or at least pulled a lot of buyers out of the market as borrowing money has become so expensive. But there are still buyers out there, and there are still more buyers than there is property. So low inventory in Brooklyn in particular is continuing to drive historically high prices. And we're seeing a lot of cash buyers back in the market again, for whom interest rates are less of an issue. Rents have continued to rise, and so people are still finding that if they can move into property ownership, that's a better long-term play for them financially. So if you have a property that can be placed correctly and positioned well, it's still a good time to sell, even as the market does not appear to be favoring sellers right now. And one of the biggest considerations is, have you held your property long enough? So what's the break-even horizon for you? So how long have you held your home? And can you sell it and get out what you put into it? So that's, I think, the biggest consideration for anybody selling, is that you don't want to sell and lose money if you can avoid it. And in New York, if selling now means losing money, we'll always encourage you to consider alternatives. Is it possible for you to rent your home out for a period of time? Is it possible for you to stay in your home and add on to it, or maybe renovate? So we never want people to have to lose money on their property. So we will go through those scenarios with you. Generally, if you've held your home for 5 years or more, then chances are you've accumulated enough equity to sell and still get out with your investment intact. But if you are trading up, you do need to consider that interest rate jump that you're going to have to pay if you've acquired a mortgage in the past few years and you have one of those really low mortgages, that buying something else in New York right now may mean you're not going to get what you're looking for, even if you sell at a really good price. So those are all the considerations that we want you to keep in mind, including your closing costs. So Rashidah, what are the kinds of closing costs that sellers can expect when they sell?
In New York, I always say, the government gets you when you're buying and the government gets you when you're selling. So a lot of people don't realize that New York has both a New York City transfer tax and a New York State transfer tax. And that is what probably one of the, one of your, definitely your closing costs that you need to consider. Depending on the selling price, for New York State, the amount is set at 0.4%. Hopefully that will stay the same. New York City changes. So if it's under 500,000, it's 1%. If it's above, it's 1.425%. So right there, you'll see automatically, just for New York City and New York State, you're nearly at 2% for transfer taxes, roughly 1.825% for transfer taxes. Other fees that you're going to have to think about if you have a co-op. Some co-ops have flip taxes, and that can vary. A flip tax is basically when you are paying a percentage or based on the number of shares, an amount to the co-op. And as I said, depends on the co-op, it can vary. It can be anywhere from 1%. I've seen 2%. If it's a HDFC, which is a different type of co-op, it can be high as 10% or even more. But sometimes it's based on the shares for the smaller co-op buildings. If you're looking at a condo, there's typically not a flip tax, but I have seen some condos that have what we call as option fees. So definitely always have a conversation with your management company to see what fees the condo may have. And then both co-ops and condos have like miscellaneous fees such as move out fees, application fees, or what we call is like fees to the transfer agent. So you have those type of fees that you have to take into consideration. Also paying off your mortgage, realtor commission, and your attorney fee. Other things that you don't necessarily have to pay at closing, but you should take into consideration is whether you have to pay capital gains, because depending on how long you own the property, now it's appreciated over a certain amount of years, and it's this huge amount of appreciation in your property. And of course, Uncle Sam wants their chunk of that as well. If it is your primary residence, there is an exemption, $250,000 for individuals. If it was your primary residence for two out of the last 5 years. If it's investment property, you definitely want to speak to an accountant, because you probably may have capital gains, and you want to think about things like 1031 exchanges, which is you're selling investment property and you have to purchase another investment property within a certain time period in order to defer the capital gains that you have to pay. We can go into a whole subject or even a seminar just on 1031 considerations, but just as a seller, especially if you maybe have rented, it's a 2-family and you rented one of the units, you may be able to use investment property, 1031 exchange, and also your primary residence. I'm not an accountant, but I would say definitely speak to the accountant, but that is something that you need to take into consideration as a seller, especially if you have a lot of appreciation in your property. So just a summary, you're looking at roughly about 7 to 8% just for closing costs, which is transfer taxes, New York City, New York State, your realtor commission, your legal fees, and then of course, paying off your mortgage, flip taxes, and things like that.
So if you've done that calculation and you find, okay, you know what, it does make sense for us to sell at this moment, then we want to look at your property and help you determine if your property is what people are looking for. So if you have, I think we just skipped forward an extra slide. Is that possible? Oh, no. Okay. Well, we're just going to talk about what people are looking for in the market right now. So you decided to sell, and what people are looking for right now, we're seeing very strong demand for renovated townhouses. So townhouses that are in a kind of a turnkey condition. That doesn't mean they need to be recently renovated. They just need to not require a lot of renovation. If you do have a home that needs renovation, there are actually a lot of buyers in the market for that right now. And that wasn't the case kind of during the pandemic and after, when money was relatively inexpensive to borrow. People didn't want to do the renovations themselves. Also, there have been supply chain issues and contractor backups and real increases in the cost of labor, and that for a long time kept people from wanting to buy fixer uppers. We are seeing more people in the market for fixer uppers now, but they are expecting a significant discount from a renovated home. So if you have something that needs work, as long as you're able to price it low, you're going to find a buyer for that home as well. But there is still very high demand for, you know, brownstone Brooklyn townhouses that are in move-in condition. But no matter what you do, there's a buyer out there for every property. So it really is a matter of marketing to those buyers, getting them in, and then managing them to a sale. You only need one buyer. You only have one home to sell. So if we can find you the one, that's what we need to do. And we like to look at this as a kind of holistic process. So do you have a plan for after you sell? That's, I think, the next question that we have for you. So we like to look at this as, you know, you're starting from here, you're going to end somewhere. We need to know where you're going to end so that we can make a plan to get you there. So if you're planning on moving out of town, obviously that's the easiest thing for you to do. Selling in New York is usually going to yield enough money to buy something someplace else. What's your timeline for that move, though? Do you need the cash proceeds from your sale in order to be able to move to your new location? What's your timeline for that? Are you hoping to move in the spring, and therefore should you put your home on the market in the fall? Or are you looking to move a year from now and you think it might take that long for your property to sell? And then also just knowing what's your bottom line for your sale. Is there a number below which it doesn't make sense for you to sell? Those are all things that you should discuss with your real estate broker before you even put together a marketing plan, so that we know we're not just going to like sell your home and then leave you homeless without a plan to move forward.
Just also to talk about the timeline, it moves pretty quickly once you're in contract. So in New York, a typical closing, if you're looking at a house or a condo, is roughly 60 days. If it's a co-op, it can be, you know, about, 60, 90, 120 days. But that really is a short time period. So really, when you start thinking about putting your property on the market is when you want to start thinking about what happens and how quickly that closing can happen, because it does happen pretty quickly.
So if you've gone through that whole process, you feel like you've got a good plan to get you from point A to point B, then it's time to assemble your team. So we're going to give you some links about how to interview a real estate agent, and with lots of questions that you can ask them. But in assembling your team, you're going to need, in addition to a real estate broker, you're going to need a real estate attorney. And don't wait until you have an accepted offer on your home to find a real estate attorney. This is something that you should find maybe even before you find your real estate broker, because determining the condition of your the condition of your sale is really key to marketing your home. So we also, I think, do we have links to questions that you can ask an attorney as well? Or you could just hire Rashidah. I mean, I think that's so good. That's a good plan. But we'll have those links are in the chat. So we need to know various things before you sell. You need to know your property type. You want to call and interview people and know that they can rep you in the right way. So this is both for your attorney and your real estate broker. You definitely want to find people on your team who communicate with you in a communication style that makes sense to you. So if you're somebody who only likes to text, you want an answer right away. You want somebody to get back to you within 15 minutes of when you sent out a text. You want somebody to get back to you in 5 minutes of when you sent out a text. Those are things that I think are really important to ask with your whoever it is that you're hiring. Some people have big teams where you have multiple agents working on a sale at the same time. Sometimes you have one broker who's really dedicated to your sale. Sometimes you're working with a team that has 50 sales going simultaneously, or you can be working with a small brokerage that is really working on a limited number of sales at a time. you will find as you go through these questions and you ask people, like, ask your friends who they've worked with, ask people in your neighborhood. If you're in a building where you're selling, if there's somebody who sells regularly in the building, definitely talk to a number of different people and find someone who you feel is a good fit for you and for your home. Doesn't have to be the most famous person, doesn't have to be somebody who's on TV. You want to find somebody who's the right fit for your home. So, and for your communication style. If you make a phone call on the weekend and you're expecting an attorney to get back to you, I don't know that I have an attorney that I can recommend to you who would do that, but you definitely want a real estate agent who's going to be able to get back to you in that period of time. So another key part is that you want a broker who is on the MLS. So we don't have a standard multiple list service here in New York City. What we do have is the Real Estate Board of New York, REBNY, and the membership of REBNY shares their listings across the board. So if I'm a member of REBNY and somebody at Corcoran or somebody at Compass is a member of REBNY, we all have access to the same listings. There are still some small independent brokerages that have not that do not co-broke or co-broker their listings with other agents. That's really going to limit the kind of visibility and buyers that your property is going to get. Those are, if you want to do it that way, that's up to you. It's just something that you make sure you want to ask people ahead of time. So what we do need to do from beginning to end is tell a consistent story about your property. So if there are issues with your property, we want to know it in advance. We either want to address those, or we also want to be able to account for them as we tell the story of your home. And there may be some issues with your home you don't even know about. And that's one of the reasons why it's crucial to talk to an attorney before you put your home on the market. Rashidah, do you have some suggestions there?
I definitely think I tell clients as they start thinking about, get your documents together, especially if you own the house for a long time. You may not know where your original survey is, or the deed is not so much important. Your attorney can always pull that up the records. But if you've refinanced your property several times over the years, see if you have that paperwork. If you did any repairs or any work on the property, see if you have that paperwork. Also, you can look up the property, see if there's any violations. If there's, a lot of times it's like building department violations or HPD violations because you failed to register a property and notify the city. So now they have the bed bug registrations. So those type of things that you may not realize it, you can always go on the city's website, HPD, Department of Building, to look that up. Also, if you did work, you want to make sure your contractors closed out unopened permits, applications that you may not realize it because your contractor didn't tell you and you thought they did everything. So always, if you can, as you start thinking about putting it on the market, is to try to see what paperwork you have, and also see what's still showing up on the records of the property. But generally, as an attorney, I always like to look up the deed to see the correct ownership. I look to see if there's a mortgage on the property. Sometimes recently, I had a client yesterday that is just going to put it in and get an accepted offer, and there's a mortgage from 1973. And he was like, wait, that was paid off. I'm like, they never record the satisfaction. So I already know preemptively we're going to have to address this. So if this particular buyer doesn't go through, we can already start the process of trying to get that satisfaction taken off, that satisfaction recorded. So things that I would say, get your deed, your survey, your owner's policy from when you purchased the property, any paperwork, if you paid off your loan, the letter that said that it was paid in full, any kind of those things you want to set it aside as you start moving things around, and don't shred until after you close. And even then, don't shred until you do your taxes.
That's such helpful information. Rashidah and I worked on a deal where the seller had to clear a sidewalk violation from before the home had been built. And sometimes you just have to do what you have to do to get the deal closed. And she did it, and we got it done. And but it's all of that is good to know in advance, because it's very bad news to receive 2 days before your closing. So, so now we know the status of your home. We're all we're all clear on what the conditions are, and it's time for us to start soliciting buyers for your home. So one of our key things that we do as a company is really look at the kind of narrative, like what's the story that your home is telling? And we're going to tell that story through photographs. We're going to tell that story through the copy that we present to people. And we're going to tell that story as we walk people through your home. And we're going to tell that story when we present them with the due diligence documents that they're going to be reviewing, which is what we were just talking about. So we want all of that to be pretty consistent. You can sell a home that is in any condition. You just need to be clear with people about that. One of the things that you see a lot in listings nowadays is virtual staging. And virtual staging has gone to the point where you will sometimes see people will insert photos of a virtual renovation of a home. And so when the clients show up and you see something that's in a state condition and they say, but I came to see this photograph, this is what I thought I was going to be seeing, it's really disconcerting to buyers. It's a waste of their time. It's a waste of your time. It's a waste of the broker's time. Who cares about that? But nobody should, you don't want people to walk into a home and be unpleasantly surprised by what they find there. So we always do real staging in our home. Sometimes we work with our own clients' furniture, our clients' own possessions. Sometimes we edit that just a little bit. Sometimes we can clear everything out and bring in staging furniture, but it really does make a difference to make sure that the staging is telling the story of the house, the story that the buyers want to hear. So a lot of that also comes down to basic prep of the house. I'm sure you've seen this everywhere on every like HGTV show about, you know, making sure you declutter, making sure you do a deep cleaning, repainting if you can. But even if you can't do those things, making sure that we have priced the home accordingly means that we're going to find a buyer and not be disappointing people as we go. So, you know, if you do the staging and the styling, the painting, you're definitely going to yield significantly more money, especially in the market that we're in right now, where people really are paying a premium for finished homes, for things that are in move-in condition. And people do fall in love with the photos. So if the photos are telling a move-in ready story, if they're telling something that looks like an attractive place where they would love to spend their lives, we want them when they open the door to see that place before them. So staging, styling helps us do all of that. And we pay for our clients staging, and we're a small company. It's one of the ways that we compete with the big companies, but it also makes it easier for us to do our job. We then make sure that the copy and the marketing fits the description of the home fits what people are going to find when they get there. And just so you know, I mean, your buyer is most likely like yourself. It's somebody like yourself, but you know, a few years younger and hopefully substantially richer than you are now. And so we're definitely looking for somebody who is interested in the same things that you're interested in, who values the same things in a home that you value. And so we don't try to make the home into something it's not. We just try to make the home into its best self. So if we've done all of that effectively, even in this very strange market that we're in, I am seeing right now well-placed homes receive offers before or immediately after the first open house. So we're seeing a lot of eager buyers who want to see things before the first open house. And we are seeing multiple offers again. I wouldn't call it necessarily bidding war, although that is happening in some underpriced properties. I would call them underpriced properties. But we are definitely seeing a multiple offer scenario in multiple markets right now. So that's really exciting for sellers. It's been a while since we had that. We've been working with single offers for a while. So it's nice to see multiple offers come back. But it also makes it harder for you to make a decision when you're considering the offers that you're getting. As Rashidah just said, like once you get to an accepted offer, things move quite quickly. Mm-hmm. So if we've done the marketing right, we want to make sure you're ready to take the next steps once we have the offers in. So considering offers is really hard part of your job, especially if there are offers that are similar to one another. Obviously, you want the highest number, but the highest number is not always the best offer. So sometimes the first offer comes in and someone offers you the asking price, and your first thought will be, oh, then we underpriced it. That is, we warn you, don't ever believe it. When the first offer is often the best offer that you will receive. So we want to treat the first offer very respectfully. We want to take it seriously. If it's not at your asking price, we always want to counter that offer. So take that first offer very seriously. It doesn't mean you underprice it. And if you think, oh, we'll just wait for somebody else to come in, you could miss that moment in the market and wait another 6 weeks for it to refresh again. So it's very dangerous to look askance at that first offer. So, but let's say you have multiple offers and they're quite similar. One of the things that you want to look at then instead is the terms. So is somebody saying, I'll give you X number of dollars in cash, 30-day closing, no contingencies, no inspection? Well, that's probably the best you're going to do from if somebody's offering a comparable number. But if that price is, let's say, substantially lower than another offer, you might be tempted to take a chance on somebody who needs financing, or somebody who needs an inspection, or somebody who needs to sell another home first. So we work with you, and your attorney will work with you to ascertain what's the best sort of risk reward scenario for you. Sometimes people really want cash and they'll offer a discount because they just want it over with. They don't want any headache. And that can be the case if you've already talked to your attorney and you know there's an issue with your certificate of occupancy, or maybe you need to replace the entire HVAC system and you want somebody who isn't going to ask you to do that before closing. So sometimes cash is better. But just because somebody needs financing doesn't mean they're not going to be able to close. And if you need 60 to 90 days to get out of the house anyway, it can be worth it to wait for someone who needs a mortgage. Mortgages cost a lot of money right now, but they are still being granted to people. So if the number is higher, you're going to get the cash at the end of the closing. Doesn't matter if they're paying cash or if the cash is coming from a bank via a mortgage. So, so there is a lot for you to consider in that process. And we try to take you through each offer individually so that you can judge them on their merits. But it's good to talk to your agent and your attorney ahead of time, so you have an idea of what kind of deal terms will be acceptable to you. So do you need a cash buyer, or is it possible for you to take somebody who needs financing? So that's a lot that we want to know ahead of time what your tolerances are. So I think another thing, again, I'll pass to Rashidah for this about what we need from you at your closing. But I should mention that if there are things that came up ahead of time, we definitely want to disclose those to buyers during this phase when they're making these offers, because you don't want to accept an offer from somebody and then tell them, oh, it turns out there's no certificate of occupancy for the building. And then those people just back off and we've lost all the other buyers as well.
Mm-hmm. Actually, that's a good tie-in, because recently also I had a client that was a seller. They, they're starting to think about putting it on the market. And the one thing is, I looked up to see if there's any violations, and they live in a landmark area, and there's a landmark violation on it for windows that they knew about, but they really didn't remember. But now they know that, as they speak with their agents, to, hey, we have this violation. If we get in any buyers, let them know about this landmark violation, because they're not going to change the windows. So something that they can, and when they accept an offers, can be upfront about and negotiate things like that. So documents that you need. If you're selling your condo or a house, Typically your deed, once again, if you don't have the actual deed, your attorney can pull it up to make sure that names match, especially if you got married or divorced, things like that. A name change. You want to make sure that the deed matches what's going to go on the contract of sale. And if you need to put like a also known as or formerly known as, that's on the contract of sale. If you're selling a co-op, you want to have your stock certificate and your lease. If you don't have the originals, then you want to make sure that if you have a mortgage on the property, you get the information of your lender so your attorney knows that they have to order the stock and lease from your lender. But once again, you want to make sure you have at least a copy of your stock certificate and your lease so that the names match. That's on it. So we've had that sometimes come up. Additionally, with married individuals, and we had one where a person passed away, and depending on the year that they bought it, they have to have specific language on the stock certificate. And even for the deed, if you held the property with a sibling or with a friend that you put on the property and didn't take them off, these are things why you want to have your deed, copies of it so your attorney can look and make sure that everything matches. Owner's policy is when you originally bought the property, whether it's a co-op or a condo, you would have got something what we call as a title insurance policy. It's separate from your homeowner's policy, but it basically says that you got good ownership to the property. And if anything comes up in the future, you can go back to that title company, and it's a simple process of getting things cleared up. If you don't have the policy, not a huge deal, but it's always better because it shortens the time to clear up any issues that may come up. A survey is similar to like a diagram of the property, a picture of the meets and bounds of the property. So if you have a house, you probably would have done that when you purchased the property as well. Condos and co-ops, you don't have a survey. So those are some of the documents you would need. If you're selling a co-op and a condo, your building documents, offering plan, financials, your realtor obviously will have a conversation with you. And I've seen some realtors that are not great, and then they send a deal sheet, and thankfully you guys are always on it, but they send a deal sheet, and then the other side's attorney is asking me for the offering plan, and I say, hey, the realtor should have sent that to you. And the realtor is like, huh? And I'm like, you're in contract, you're about to go into contract, and you haven't even got those basic. So by the seller, contact your management company if you have a co-op or a condo and get your offering plan, get your financials. You probably had that when you purchased it and probably put it to the side, but you can always, if you can't find it, get it from your management company. So those are definitely things that you're going to need as you start putting your property on the market and start thinking about selling it.
Yeah, that's a really important thing when we're doing prep with our clients. If we're selling a co-op or a condo, we're gonna want to get all of those in advance so that really in New York, the big deal killer is time, because in New York, an accepted offer has no legal standing. Your buyer can walk away at any time before they sign their contract and put down their 10% deposit. So that period of time between accepted offer and contract signed, which is really anywhere between 1 and 2 weeks, during which time they're reviewing the due diligence, they're doing an inspection if they require one. That is one of the 2 most stressful times for you as a seller, is that period of time. And anything that slows that process down. So if we don't have the offering plan ready to go, if we don't have your survey ready to go, then that can add an entire day to that process. And that's a day that your buyer can walk away. So we don't want that process to be stressful. We don't want to be the cause of any of the friction. We want to have everything that the buyer needs, we want to have ready for them from the moment that you accept their offer. All right, so contracting. So due diligence, we talked a little bit about due diligence. We are well, I'll throw this back to Rashidah in a second. So once we've worked out what all of the terms are, we will send a deal sheet to your attorney and to the buyer's attorney. The deal sheet breaks down all of the terms that you've already agreed to. Are you accepting financing? Are they waiving their appraisal contingency, et cetera, et cetera? All of that we've got worked out. We send it to the attorneys. The seller's attorney then takes over from there. And we, as the agents, act really as almost administrative support to keep the process going. So Rashidah's in the pole position.
Now that you have your, offer, deal sheets has been sent out by your agent. Now your attorney has to prepare the draft contract. So this is also where it comes important. Those documents that your attorney asks for you, like a copy of your deed or a copy of your stock certificate, your latest maintenance payment, a copy of your mortgage statement comes in handy because we want to make sure that the information on the deal sheet matches the information on the stock certificate and shares or on the deed on as far as names and things like that, so we can send out that contract of sale. A draft contract of sale is going out to the buyer side. Attorney will make some comments, send over comments to your attorney before the contract is finalized. If you're selling a co-op or a condo, the buyer's attorney has to do what we call a due diligence review as they're also reviewing the contract of sale. And that due diligence review takes roughly, as Tina had mentioned, about a week to two, depending on how quickly they get documents, how quickly the management company may respond. So that's why we want to make sure you have those documents already ready for them, so that 1 to 2 week is more like a 1 week period versus a 2 week period. So that due diligence is done by the buyer's attorney. Once the due diligence and the contract review is completed, the buyer will sign the contract of sale. If you're selling a house, really there's not really a due diligence period. It's really the inspection and the contract review. Once you're in contract, now your time period. So if your buyer's getting a mortgage, they typically have 30 to 45 days to get their mortgage once you're in contract. That's now they're working with their lender, underwriters to make sure that the appraisal is done. If it's a co-op or a condo, their bank has to approve the co-op and the condo. So not much for you to do as a seller. You're kind of sitting back at this point. There's a lot of things going on behind the scene on the buyer's end. But once again, you should be aware of that. It's going to take roughly 30 to 45 days for that buyer to get their official mortgage commitment from their bank during that time period and when you're in contract. The closing of the transaction happens with about 60 days or 90 plus days if you're looking at a co-op. And that is, so you're looking at time periods that are running at the same time. But once again, as a seller, getting you into contract is probably the most you're going to be doing. Afterwards, it's kind of like a lull. You're working on hopefully starting to pack, figuring out where you're going if you haven't, and waiting if it's a co-op. We tell you wait to a certain degree, depending on your building, because unfortunately there's this third party that has to also approve the transaction as a seller, which gives you even more anxiety. If you're looking at selling your house or a condo, it's really just making sure your title is good, the buyer is able to get the mortgage, and scheduling that closing, which is about that 60-day time period. So that's your closing deal is getting everyone on the same page. When we have the provision in the contract, it says on or about 60 days or on or about 90 days, depending on the type of transaction. And you want to have a conversation with your attorney on what that looks like and timing. And it's not a date set in stone. It's a moving date. So even if you planning, hey, I'm leaving the country on certain day, I'm moving out of state, have a conversation with your attorney so that they can make arrangements for things regarding closing that deal and making sure that you get to your closing.
Yeah, that's a really key thing. The fact that just because you look at your contract and it says the day that the closing is going to happen, it rarely happens on that actual day. So, so if you know you're going to be out of town, making power of attorney arrangements with your attorney to make sure that you've got everything covered, that's really crucial. And once you have your closing date set, so your buyer has been cleared to close, you've got the closing is happening, then we're going to do the final walkthrough. So during the final walkthrough, we're going to take the buyers through, and the house needs to be in what they call broom clean condition or broom swept condition. So it doesn't have to be spotlessly clean. We try to make that really quite clean for people, but it needs to be in the condition that it was basically when the buyers last viewed it. So if you've done something where you were like, you know what, I really like this stove. And so when I move all my furniture out, I'm also going to take my Viking range and replace it with this one that I bought at, Best Buy. That's going to be a problem at the walkthrough. So we want everything to be in the condition it was during the inspection or during their most recent walkthrough. And if anything came up in the inspection that needed to be addressed, needs to have been addressed by the time you do the walkthrough. So if there are busted outlets in your house, if there are, small things can really throw this off. If you were like, oh, I didn't know they wanted all of the ceiling fans, or gee, I didn't know that the bookshelves that were attached to the wall were actually going to convey with the home. Those are, before you move anything, need to check with your agent or check with your attorney, but check with your agent to make sure that you're not violating the terms of your agreement. So if there's anything that needs to be done, we're also really good. We're great problem solvers. Like, we can sail in there and it's like, oh, the dish was all of a sudden the dishwasher breaks. We can get somebody in to fix your dishwasher. Like, those are things that we can do. But if there are things that are surprising to everybody during that final walkthrough, let's say suddenly it's summertime and you turn the air conditioning on for the first time and the air conditioning doesn't work. You don't have time to fix the air conditioning. Then that is something that we go back to the attorneys and say, we need to account for this difference in some way. And Rashidah can talk you through a few of the different ways that we handle that.
Yeah, so definitely if something comes up during the walkthrough, that's what's important. Your contract typically states that the buyer has the right to do a walkthrough within 48 hours prior to the closing. So that means that you have to be out, your property has to be vacant and broom clean so that they can do their walkthrough. Also, utilities have to be on. I tell clients, do not turn off your utilities, keep them on until you get the check, and even maybe a day after, just to make sure everything is fine. Do not turn off your utilities. But just to what Tina was saying about the walkthrough, let's say something does come up and it's an appliance that isn't working, there's not enough time to get a repair. You can say, okay, it's an old appliance, this is how much it may cost to repair it or replace it. We'll give them a credit of such an amount. So we typically try to give credits because as a seller, you want to just give the keys, get your cash, and leave. You don't want to have anything lingering after the closing. Worst case scenario for sellers, we can put money in escrow and say we'll hold a certain amount of your funds until this item gets repaired or taken care of after the closing. As I say, as a seller, that really should not be your first option because it ties up your funds. And, even for $500, sometimes it will tie it up for months because the buyer decides something else comes up. So you want to try to give them a credit. And sometimes it may be giving them a little bit more, but it's just about sometimes just not having to deal with that headache after the closing and you've moved on and you sold your property and now you are free to go on to your next chapter. So those are typically what happens. We give credits, or you give a credit, or you do money in escrow for certain items if something comes up in the walkthrough.
So one of the things that Rashidah was just saying is like 48 hours before you get that check, you've got to be out of your house. So let's say you need the proceeds from the sale to be able to make your next move, even if that's a move into a rental, but you can't afford to move into the rental until you get the money from the sale. Then there are ways that we can structure the deal so that there is a post-closing occupancy or post-possession so that you can stay in the home after the closing for a set period of time and then deliver it, then do that final walkthrough after you have had a chance to move into your new home. So Rashidah, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, post-closing possession or post-closing occupancy. Typically a short one would be maybe 5 to 7 days. Because you really want to try to keep it short because you don't want to, we put in the agreement that doesn't create a landlord-tenant situation. But once again, the longer you're in there, the more possibility of something happening. So you want to really keep it a short time period if it's possible. So you'll see maybe a standard 5 to 7 days. Also during that time period, you're paying the buyer's carrying costs. So their mortgage per diem, you continue to pay the utilities, the real estate taxes and things. So it's not a period where you're just, for free. So you also have to remember that you're going to be paying during that time period to stay there. In addition, some of your funds is held back in escrow to hold on to until you are definitively left the property for the buyer to do that final walkthrough, and then your money can be released. But there is, in those situations, we have clients that are buying and selling at the same time, and they absolutely need those funds because it doesn't make sense to move into, put stuff in storage and then move twice. So those are situations that you would have also with your attorney in the beginning of the process when you're going into contract, because you want to put that clause into your contract of sale. Because if it's not in your contract of sale, the buyer doesn't have to agree to it later on when you determine that you may need that. So it's rather to have it as an option versus having to ask for it later when they say, no, you have to get out and there's no option for you at that point.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. That one of the things I think people, one of the misconceptions about this process is that there's some standard, there's like an assembly line and you get on it and just a series of things are going to happen to you when you decide you're going to sell. And you can really, if you assemble your team ahead of time, if you're really frank about your home and what your needs are, you can actually craft an entire process from start to finish that's going to serve your needs as a seller. And we'll find you a buyer who is willing to agree to a post-closing occupancy for you. We'll find you a buyer who is going to work with your non-functioning HVAC system. We can do all of that as long as we know ahead of time, and we can make that process work for you. So don't feel discouraged by any of the things that we've said here today. I know it's a lot and it is incredibly stressful. Like there's nothing, we're not trying to sugarcoat anything here. Like it is hard, but if you have owned real estate in New York, it can be very profitable to sell it. Even during times when it doesn't seem like the market is really great. So, if we can make it work for you, we're going to work as hard as we possibly can to make it less stressful and more profitable for you as a seller. So if you have any questions about this, we encourage you to reach out to us directly. We're going to be emailing a copy of this to everybody who registered. So you should have all of our contact information. We also have other seller videos that you can watch on YouTube, and we have a seller's handbook that we will be sending along to you as well. We have more links we're going to put into the chat. And I don't think we have any questions in the chat, but I actually have a question for you, Rashidah. Because Rashidah's been doing working with us on a number of different deals recently, and I just wanted, when you are representing a seller who has tenant, like a multifamily building, and they have to move tenants out of their home, but they're kind of dependent on that income from the tenants in order to continue making the mortgage payments that they have to make until they sell. Do you have any recommendations for owners who are in multifamily buildings where they have to deal with tenants, even if those tenants no longer have leases?
So I guess if it's, if you're selling it with the tenants, or if you're selling it with, if it has to be delivered vacant, because a lot of times buyers want to kind of maybe want a vacant, so they can choose their buyer, maybe their tenant and the rents and things like that. But if you have to deliver it vacant, then there is a fine line about when notifying your tenant, depending on how long they've been there. If they've been there for, even if they're month to month and they're no longer on a lease, you still have to give them notice. And I believe now with the new landlord tenant laws, it's either a 60-day or 90-day notice, even if it's a month to month tenant, because they've been there for a certain amount of years, and it depends on the amount of years. So I always tell clients, have a conversation with their tenant to gauge if they're going to be difficult, if they're already planning on moving. The worst case scenarios, if you want to give the tenant some money to move, and you can enter into agreement and say, okay, you may not get we will pay you so for your moving expenses and things like that, and you can move prior to closing and you'll get the funds after. There's different ways that you can work with your tenants. But yeah, even with month-to-month tenants, really it's going to be about having a conversation with them and hopefully them being cooperative and moving out in time for the closing. And giving them enough time to move out, because once again, if it's a 60-day closing and you're just telling them when you sign contract that you sold and they have to move out in 30 days or 60 days, they may not be as receptive because now they have to find a place and they and the property has to be delivered vacant. So always have a conversation with your tenant to gauge where they are and see if there's something that can be worked around with.
Yeah, I think that's really important. We did a deal recently where the tenant was simply not able to find a new place to move. And the owner ended up putting her tenant into a 30-day Airbnb to give her 30 additional days. This was after she'd given her, I don't know, 6 months notice, more than 6 months notice. But it was, it was that final hurdle that she had to cross. She was willing to do it. She knew she had to get it done. And so she took care of her tenant to the 30 days beyond the closing. So you really do what you have to do to get it done. But yeah, it can be really challenging because you don't want your home to be vacant. You don't want those apartments to be vacant if you have a closing scheduled for, let's say you have a closing scheduled for September 30th and your tenant is out, you could go an entire additional month before you can really pressure the buyers to close, right?
Because if it's an on or about date, there's a grace period of 30 days, and even then, it's still not set in stone. It's like you still have to send out a time of residence notice. So there's different things that you have to. So it's a really fine line, especially when you have tenants regarding that. There was one situation where we had a buyer where I was representing a seller, and they had to give the tenant out. And they put in that if the buyer, this was an all cash transaction. So we put in a provision that if the buyer did not close, that they would reimburse them for this amount of lost rent for this amount of time. But that was a very specific situation. Not because the buyer wasn't getting the mortgage and there wasn't a lot of moving parts. So just always have a conversation with your attorney, with your realtor, if you have tenants, on logistically.
I think that's a really good example. What you just cited is that there's a way that you can craft this deal that is like, because everybody's sale is specific, right? Like there's a certain number of things that are always going to happen, but your home is unique and you are unique and your needs are unique. And so are the capabilities and needs of your buyer. So really finding a way to get those things to interlace so that everybody feels like they're being well served by this process. Like that's really what we're here to do, is try to knit together something that makes everybody feel good in the end.
Yeah.
Everybody wins.
Yes.
Oh, well, so good to see you, Rashidah.
As well. Thank you.
Instead of just emailing back and forth, instead of just CCing each other on things. But thanks everybody for joining us, and please do reach out to us directly. There's no obligation in reaching out. Like, we're happy to talk, and we love to solve problems. That's the other thing. So we love our jobs, and what seems stressful to you, to us is a challenge that we welcome. So bring it on. And we wish you the best of luck with your sale.
Have a good one, everyone. Great seeing you, Tina.
Thanks. Bye.